Okay, in this part of algebra, I'm going to introduce you to index notation. You already come across index notation in the prime factorization topic. Okay, it's just that some of you, maybe you can relate to the idea of index notation. But when it comes to algebra, sometimes some students will get confused. Okay, so this one is a very, very important section. So do take note. Okay, so in arithmetic means, right, the normal number. If you see a 3 times 3, we know that it's going to be 3 squared. If you have a 5 times 5 times 5, that will be 5 cubed. So essentially the power is the number of times of multiplication. So essentially you got 3 numbers being multiplied. So you multiply the same number 3 times. Okay. So square means you just multiply 2 of them. So you just multiply the 2 number. Okay, power 4. So it's repeated 4 times. So the same thing in algebra. The same thing in algebra. If you got a times a, there will be a squared. If you got a times a times a, there will be a cubed. Okay, so if you got a times a times a times a times a, there will be a power 5. It's very simple. Okay, the common confusion will be students will be confused later on by bracket. Or if you choose to disregard bracket, right, your algebra will be very, very wrong. So for example, right, okay, with A and B, there are some difference. So if I wrote a 5a squared, it actually means 5 times a times a. 5a squared means 5 times a times a. But if I had put it in a bracket, the bracket is repeated twice. So the bracket is multiplied twice. So it will be 5a times 5a. So can you see it's there's actually a difference. And if I simplify this, 5 times 5 is 25. So actually I got this. So can you see that it's actually very different? One of them without bracket is a 5 times a times a. With the bracket, it actually becomes a 25 times a times a. So in algebra, you got to take note of the use of bracket. If you anyhow put bracket, when there's no bracket, you see it as bracket, or when there's bracket, you ignore the bracket, you find that your algebra will be very, very confusing. You choose to confuse yourself, and then you make your algebra very bad. So brackets in algebra is very, very important. Okay, so I'm going to show an example of how we simplify algebra. Okay, simplifying algebra is quite simple. So for example, if you look at 3a, 6x times 8y. So 6x times xy is equivalent to 6 times x times 8 times y. I'm writing it at the side because you do not need to show this, but this is your thinking space. So in your thinking space, you are thinking of 6 times x times 8 times y. So when you see numbers, common sense will tell you, multiply the numbers. So this is exactly what I'm going to do. Number times number, algebra times algebra. When I do algebra times algebra, it's just a xy. So remember, there's an invisible multiplication. So if it's a multiplication, I do not need to write the multiplication. It can be invisible. So in part B, you will be seeing minus 5x, which is equivalent to minus 5 times x. And you're going to multiply 7 times y. So that is the thinking process. So you see a negative number and a positive number. So you apply what you learn in your negative number and positive number. Negative and positive become negative. So I should get a negative 35. Algebra times algebra, that will just be a x1. Okay, so it's very simple, not much working. Okay, when it is a divide, I choose to see it as a fraction. Okay, I will choose to see it as a fraction. So the algebra x is in the numerator. The algebra y is in the denominator. You can do the normal cancellation. You know, like primary school cancellation. Then you are left with 5x and 1y. So usually I will not write the 1y. I will just write it as y. So when your algebra is single algebra like this, we know that it's actually 1y. So you do not need to write 1y. The next one has a longer product. Okay, even with the longer product, it actually means 4 times d times 3 times e times 5 times f. So you just punch all your calculator, 4 times 3 times 5 in the calculator, that will be a 60. And the rest of the algebra that you're going to multiply, you just multiply them. We try to multiply by alphabetical order. So it'll be D, E, F. So all this means multiplication. Okay, the next one, where you got 3 times P times P. So if you still remember, what is P times P? P times P is P squared. So this is just a 3P squared. And you shouldn't need a bracket. Okay, the next one, usually the power will confuse student. If your mind is very weak, you find that you couldn't process power. So like for part F, the 2P cube is like this. So that is the 2P cube. And then the 4P square will be 4 times P times P. So I'm doing it at the side because I didn't want to show this. So this should be in your thinking space. So again, right, where you see the number 2 and 4, that will just be an 8. And you count how many P's are there. There are 5 of them. So that will be P power 5. So that will be the answer. Okay, so dealing with powers will be a bit challenging for a start. You just don't mess up your brain thinking about different things that is not told to you. Okay, the next one, right, there's a bracket that has a square. So the bracket is repeated twice. So when a bracket is repeated twice, that is what happened. So you got to think about the negative things that you learn in real numbers. So negative and negative will actually become positive. So this part will become a positive x squared. So if it's a positive x squared, I will just write a x squared. So this part will become a positive x squared. Negative and negative is positive, and then x times x is the x squared. So you multiply by a positive x squared. So anyway, to make it simple, I will just write 3 times x squared. So that will just be a 3x squared. Okay. In chapter 2, we also learn about 4 operation. Here in algebra, we also have 4 operation. So that is another challenge. So whatever you learn in chapter 2 is also necessary here. So if you look at H, where is the for operation? Do you realize that there is a division? So in fact, you got to handle the division. Okay, so how are we going to handle the division? Okay, so for this, if you don't want to touch, then we'll just let it be first. Okay, so we handle the division first, like our for operation. In algebra, we handle it with a fraction. We will handle it with a fraction. And you'll find that you encounter the negative. So do you realize there's a double negative? So like with the same rules that you apply in chapter 2, that will become a plus. Negative will become a plus. Okay, now it doesn't look so complex already. Then I'm going to simplify. So I'm going to double up the bracket here. The bracket is repeated twice. And there is a cancellation that I can do. The primary school cancellation. So I'm left with 2x over 1. So for the double bracket, so what does the double bracket represent? That means it's like 3 times x times y times 3 times x times y. So mentally, 3 times 3 is a 9. X times x is a x squared. Y times y will be a y squared. So that will be my final answer. Okay. So there will be 4 operations involved. There are negative algebra, positive algebra. So the next one, right, if you observe, there is a multiplication that is involved first. And then there is a division that is involved. So under your for operation, you will do the multiplication, you will do the division, and then eventually you add them up. Correct. Your for operation says that you do the multiplication, division first. Okay, in the multiplication, you will see that there is bracket. And this bracket is repeated like 3 times. So it's actually rather confusing. So maybe you want to organize them a little bit. After you organize them a little bit, by now you should be able to process this multiplication. This multiplication, if you process it, that will be a -8. And this will be a p cube. Okay, so I'm going to process the multiplication. So I will have -8p cubed times 3p plus the divide. The usual way I handle a divide is a fraction. So I will have -8 times 3, which is a -24. Then what about p cubed and a p? That will be a p4. And then my final answer is just like this. That's it. That's the final answer for this part. So there will be 4 operations in your algebra expression. There will be index notation. So it can be quite complex. It gets a while to get used to all this.